Good
Hello,
evening.
hello.
Welcome to Galactic Terrors, the online reading series sponsored by the Horror Writers Association New York chapter. Welcome to Galactic Terrors, the online reading series sponsored by the... Sorry about that. I was getting a little feedback. I don't know if that came through over the mic. My apologies. Carol, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, thank you. It's been raining a couple days here in New York City, and I have to say it's taken all of the leaves off of my tree. They're in a nice big pile outside waiting for me to go and collect them. So it's that time of year.
That's my strategy too, as I usually wait until the trees are bare before I rake a single leaf.
I got a new toy this year. I use a riding mower, and it mulches it into this giant bag behind me that's 10 feet long. So it's like I'm driving around my lawn with a huge worm following me. It's a little bizarre.
That is awesome. I'm envious. But that is not why we are here tonight. Galactic Terrors is an online reading series presenting horror stories, horror fiction with a mix of science fiction, fantasy, or other dark genres and ideas. And we are very happy tonight to bring you a great program. We have 4 fantastic readers lined up. We'll be hearing stories by Randee Dawn, Lou Rera, Chris Mars, and Craig DiLouie tonight. And I think it's going to be a fantastic program.
I'm pretty excited. A lot of the people that we've had come on the show have done such a great job so far, and it's always fun for me to hear the writer read their own work, because you can really tell how they feel about it. It shows a real connection to it, and I think it's a great way to get a sampling of what they're interested in and what they write, and find some good books to read.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the cool things about doing this online is we have started bringing readers from all place. Craig and Chris tonight are joining us from Canada. We've had people in the audience from all over the world for past programs, and we're talking to readers from literally around the world to come on and do sessions with us in 2021.
That's going to be exciting. That's really
should
fun.
be fun. Yeah. So just a little bit about the Horror Writers Association. For anyone who's watching that's not familiar with the HWA, it's an international author-supported networking group for people who write horror. It administers the Bram Stoker Awards each year, holds the annual StokerCon convention, offers mentorship opportunities and mentee opportunities. Market newsletter monthly goes out to members. We run several scholarships that support work in the horror genre, and lots of other stuff that I'm probably not thinking of right now.
It's because it's such an active group. One of the neat things about this time of year, we're sort of coming towards the last couple of months when people can put in their submission for consideration for the Stoker Award. And that's an award given out at our annual convention in the late spring in a bunch of different categories. And Jim, I know you're very knowledgeable about submitting to that. You're the one I ask when I have questions about it.
You're not the only one. But no, I'm always happy to answer questions about that stuff. And I always encourage people to recommend works for the Stoker ballot for consideration. If you've read something this year, if you've seen a really good horror movie or TV show, read a piece of nonfiction that was really exceptional, please recommend it. Not only does it put that work forward for consideration for the Stoker Awards, but it gets it on the recommended reading list. And so it's helps everyone else who's looking for good horror or good writing about horror to find some great stuff to check out.
Mm-hmm. I actually think that's one of the benefits of being an HWA member is getting all of the opt-ins and seeing all the stuff that see the things that people are doing in horror. It's such a wide and diverse field.
Yes, definitely. So, but onward for the program. We're here in November now. This is our 3rd session. We are really excited that we've been able to do this consistently every month. Last month, of course, was Halloween season, and I think a lot of the horror folks involved here were busy with lots of fun stuff and lots of work stuff. I know Lisa Morton, who was our guest for the very first Galactic Terrors back in September, was running ragged, I think, by the end of October, keeping up with Halloween and ghost stories and things like that. And Lisa was actually one of the presenters for the HWA's new Horror University Online workshop series. And we did a beta session this fall of 4 workshops. And based on the really overwhelmingly positive feedback we've gotten and the excellent attendance at the workshops. We're going to be doing a broader program of that next year. So we'll be announcing that hopefully within the next couple of months, what the 2021 Horror University Online schedule will be.
That's great. Some of those programs that I've attended have been great. You did a terrific job with emceeing and asking questions, by the way, sir. That was well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep,
And,
I had some fun with that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I did some of these programs when I attended StokerCon, but it's really cool that we can bring these to people in the comfort of their home, all year round. StokerCon just doesn't have to be just one weekend of a month, of a year.
Exactly. Yeah, and this is a great way for people who may not be able to attend StokerCon to participate. And similar to sort of the people we've had turning out for our readings, it was an international audience that we had for Horror University Online, which was great. And it was also crazy because it meant some people in different places were, literally signing on at midnight to do these workshops. So it was pretty awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we probably have chatted enough about that kind of stuff. Why don't we get on to the fun stuff that everybody's waiting for, and we'll do some readings.
That sounds terrific.
All right. I'm very happy to introduce our first reader tonight, Randee Dawn. Randee is a Brooklyn-based author who writes about the glam world of entertainment by day and the seamy underbelly of the real world by night. Her short stories have been published in anthologies and publications, including Children of a Different Sky, Where We May Wag, and either Samhain or Samhain Secrets. I'm not sure how they prefer to pronounce it. She is the co-editor of Across the Universe, Tales of Alternative Beetles, and co-wrote the Law & Order SVU Unofficial Companion. Her articles appear regularly in Variety, the Los Angeles Times, Today.com, and Emmy Magazine. Her work, from the glam to the gory, can be found at randeedawn.com. All right. Randee, welcome to Galactic Terrors.
Hi, everyone. My name is Randee Dawn, and I'm about to read to you from my upcoming novelette, Rough Beast Slouching, which will publish later this year in Dim Shores Volume 2. You just saw the cover of it a few seconds ago. You can pre-order it now. There'll be a link in the chat section, I believe. And you can also find the information on my website, which is randeedawn.com. And note that I have the goofy spelling of Randee with 2 E's. So what I'm going to read you is from early in the story. This is only an excerpt. And here's what you need to know. Nevada Sullivan is our narrator, and she's been pretty depressed since her mom died, and it wasn't pretty. She's hard-boiled and lonely, and a music journalist friend of hers named Scott invites her out to see a band play. So that's where we get started. We went, of course, friends only. Scott's not my type, if you get the drift. Truth is, I ain't pretty, so the girls look past me and the boys don't interest me, and a long time ago, I stopped pressing my nose on that class. Got used to status and quo as constant companions. But I said I'd go with Scott's for shits and giggles, and because a gal can get a little too wrapped up in her own head. We met at this dive in Central Square that's half hummus dispensary, half live venue called the Middle East. One of the bands that night was doing a live stream for YouTube or some such shit, and to say the place was crowded was like saying the Charles River smells a little funky. It was like every yahoo in the world had come to the show and crammed themselves up front so they could slam into one another. To please Scott, I stood there curmudgeoning the night away, nitpicked the amateur songs and actively booed a Peter Frampton cover, negged on the ugly haircuts, harped on the watery free beer, snickered at the violent dancers up front. They were doing something called mushing, I think Scott called it. Then kids started filtering back from the scrum near the stage and looked at me with black eyes and dripping bloody noses and dislocated fingers and wide, insane grins. Reminded me of Ma and the morph drip, and my tough girl attitude went to crumbs. Claustrophobia alert, I yelled at Scott's direction so I didn't bust out crying and pushed my way past to the first clear space I could find. Scott chased me down, and the next thing I knew, we were in a roped-off, saner area in another part of the room, and he was passing over another cold, nameless concoction. I put it up to my face. Better? Yeah, I mumbled and squared my shoulders. The view improved considerable in the VIP space, for all the crazed fans were far away, looking like a hair carpet waving while the bands ground through bad blues and stumbled over simple rock chords. Then I turned around and the view got even better. I clocked this chick lounging on a moth-eaten, formerly velvet sofa, one long leg bent over the other, foot bouncing. Ponytails held up some bright blonde hair and barrettes restrained the loose ends. Scott caught me ogling. Kay, he said, this here's Nevada. Kay's in on a few, but maybe you two might connect. My mouth went all dry and I pulled a lollipop I always carry from my pocket. Looked at it, then looked at her, handed it to her. Scott nearly had hysterics. Kay unwrapped it right there, gave it a good old swirl with her pink little tongue, then tilted her head and handed it back to me. Hold this? She asked, kicking herself to her feet and picking up a nearby guitar. I was sold. This here's Jordan. Scott gestured at a beefy, bearded guy with a bushy mane of dark hair. Singer, writes songs too. Jordan held out a meaty paw and I took it, liking him right away because of his grip. Can't tell you how many guys I want to slap upside the head for giving a gal one of those "I might break you" softies. Nevada, I said, tapping my chest with the bottle. Heh, I shot a guy in Reno, he chuckled at me. Just to see him cry, I grinned back, misquoting on purpose. You got no idea how many folks make some kind of Las Vegas joke when they meet me. I gave him points for originality. A minute later, Kay and Jordan, were waving bye as they picked their way back to the backstage. But then Jordan cut to one side, beelining to the equipment storage near the stage. A woman was sitting there, hiked up on a packing case, hands caught behind her like she was hiding a surprise. He halted hard in front of her and they made googly eyes. Hell, I probably would too. Even at this distance, I could see she was a grabber, long black hair shining like asphalt after the rain. She had on a white shirt that billowed over a wide black leather belt, her lower half encased in shimmery leather pants. She wrapped those long legs round Jordan's waist like they were the only two in the room. She was so petite, almost childlike next to his bulk. Then she turned from Jordan, who had leaned in for a smooch, and eyeballed me. No expression on her face, but those eyes, even at 20 paces, they made me twitch. That intense gaze was like a long needle slowly piercing the pleasure center of my brain, only it didn't make me feel good. It made me feel tired. She turned back and gave Jordan what he was puckering up for. They're next, said Scott, and I jumped. I forgot he was even there. Who? Blue Puka, he said. Kay and Jordan's band. Worst goddamn name ever, I thought. Made me think of shell bracelets. He pointed with his pencil as an announcer took the stage, and the crowd exploded. They've got a hell of a lot of buzz, he yelled. Gonna be huge. Next to me, the sound man flashed a light and darkness swallowed the room. Scott pushed past me to get a closer look, and I was alone in the VIP section. A spotlight lit up the announcer. You know why we're here, he said by way of an introduction. Free beer, shouted some wit. He ignored the funny man. We're making a video tonight, so everybody act like this is the biggest damn concert of your life. Act like Elvis just took the stage. That would be unpleasant, said a firm, insinuating voice next to me. Not Kay. Definitely not Scott. My mouth went dry again, and I wondered what happened to Kay's lollipop. Finally, I slid a glance to the side. It was the woman from the other side of the room, the one playing tonsil hockey with Jordan just a few seconds ago. She stood next to me, arms gently folded, hip cocked to one side. I wasn't sure if the laws of physics permitted her to get across the room as fast as she had, but I wouldn't argue with facts. Unpleasant? I croaked. Well, she said in a clear, lilting voice, if Mr. Elvis Aaron Presley were here, don't you suppose he'd be in a rather rotten state? Even a fat man like him couldn't last long after 40 years underground. How the hell did you get, I began. I go where I like, she said, smiling up at me, and that needle appeared in my brain. A soft, sliding invasion. When she blinked, I got an up-close look at those unsettling eyes, an earthy, pulsing green, like moss or fungus, something that grows over dead things and consumes them. "Greetings, Nevada Sullivan," she continued. "How—" I stuttered again. "You may call me Shiri," she said, a name that reminded me of gauzy things, and nodded. "Now hush." Lights blasted on full on stage, and as the drums crashed everyone awake. In the sudden bright stood Kay and their bassist and drummer, but no Jordan. I eyeballed where he'd been a second earlier, and there he was, scoping the area like he'd lost something. Next to me, that something waved a tiny white hand and twiddled her fingers to the right. He stopped turning around and made a gigantic leap, achieving the stage faster than I imagined a guy his size could move. He gripped the mic like it was a lifeline, and the song kicked into gear. Shiri sighed with pleasure. Now, when it comes to music, there's what I like, and there's what the rest of the world coughs up $100 to see. But this band, the one with the worst goddamn name ever, killed me. Blue Puga weren't just good. It was like somebody took all the music I ever loved in my life and made me see it was just crayon scratches. This was above all that, pure in the ears, straight out the heart type sounds. I was in that moment with that music. Some of it was heart-tearing bluesy, some of it was swampy southern rock, and somewhere buried in there was a powerful heart that made me think of the biggest, meatiest 60s Brit bands. And while a lot of it was about how great those songs were, it was Jordan too. He was this dervish of a frontman, whipsawing this way and that, hauling us along for the ride through a forest of shining knives. Kay more than held her own, wielding that axe like she meant to show who was boss, doing everything she could to keep up with Jordan. She ripped into her guitar and flipped those ponytails around and squeezed her eyes so tight her sweat looked like tears. They were a fantastic team, but it was no question of who was in charge. Kay was good, but Jordan had that it everyone always talked about. 2 songs in, I started feeling off. The needle in my brain was turning to meet a jelly inside. Had to be the crappy free beer. I was scoping out the nearest exit sign when a small hand slipped into mine and locked me in place. All at once, the music was inside me. It went looking for all my soft places and found them and pressed hard until I felt a funny flip all the way downtown in my good spot. I froze up, then tried to relax into it. This was some kick-ass music. But as the song went on, the sensation coiled up in me and there was no release. I loved it and hated it, wanted it more, and had to throw it off me. This wasn't right. This was bad idea jeans. I thought of Ma and of morphine drips that come after the screaming agony. I let go of it all and the hand slipped from mine. Shiri looked up at me, a half smile on her lips. "Thank you," she said. "That was just enough." I bolted for the back entrance and vomited in the alley. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Oh my goodness, Randee. Now I want to know the rest of it. Come on. This isn't fair.
Well, you get the book. It's on pre-order right now. You can get
Yes. Well, one of the things that I was planning to ask you, you may have just answered for us. I know you do so many different things in the industry. You're a writer and you're an editor and you work in the entertainment business and you interview people. I was wondering how much the entertainment business influences what you're writing. And I'm guessing, did we just hear some examples? What was the inspiration of the story?
Well, I've never been in a band and I only sort of kind of maybe play the piano because Mom made me. But I was a music journalist for many, many years, and those people in that profession fascinate me in a way that the other stuff that I write about, which is movies and TV, just doesn't quite. And I loved covering that field. I loved being on the tour bus. I loved being in the backstage area. So, when they say write what you know, it's like you don't have to write exactly what you know because I'm not in a band. I've never written a song. But I know what the milieu is like, and I know what it's like to talk to musicians and hang out with them.
And so what like backstage,
Yeah, and what goes on backstage and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of flavored into this story, which actually I wrote a version of many, 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 many years ago and has gone through several iterations. So the fact that it's actually getting published now is actually a real thrill for me, because it's like, wow, never put anything in the trunk. It can always come back out again.
Yeah. It's not going to stay there forever. No, that's really intriguing. I think that was a really nifty glance at the way people talk, the way they act. And, when we go to a concert, we see them on stage, and you're just telling us what they do before they get on there and
Right.
take away a part of our brain, apparently. So that's very cool. Very cool. Now, how about the editing? You were my editor for the Across the Universe Beatles anthology.
You mean this book?
That one. What a great book.
Which Carol has a story in.
How does your editing influence what you write? Does it up your game? Does it make you think differently about your stories?
I think what editing has done for me, both in the nonfiction and the fiction area, is to teach me what it's like to be edited. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I feel like I understand what people are looking for now that I have tried to look for it myself. And I feel like I'm a better writer because of that. I was very precious about my writing early on. I was like, one draft and it's perfect. And how dare you to speak to me about it? And I'm much better at that now, which I think, as I say, has made me a better writer. So editing the anthology sort of showed me, it also gave me a real thrill, because I was like, wow, some of these stories are really not very good that they're sending to us. I should send out more of my stuff before maybe it's totally polished, because other people are doing that.
That's cool. Yeah, I edited some charity anthologies with new writers, and we worked a lot together, and that helped me improve my writing by helping them. So that was a cool thing.
Yeah.
Now, we did have an interesting question. Rob asked in the chat, for those of us who aren't super familiar with music writers, who are some you can recommend? Is that something you follow? Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, I guess you're talking about people who write for covering the music industry, as opposed to, but I'll maybe mention one or two of each. I mean, there's a writer who used to write for Rolling Stone named Mikhail Gilmore, and I don't think he writes for them anymore, but if you can find some of his older pieces, he really was a terrific writer, and he's written fiction too. His cousin, maybe it was his brother. One of his very close relatives was actually Gary Gilmore, and he wrote a whole book called Shot in the Heart. That really moved me. That's not specifically about music, but his music pieces are excellent. I was a very big fan of Rolling Stone's long form stories, because they really got into the head of the musicians. But who's actually writing today? I confess I don't read but so much music journalism these days. But I will say that somebody who really knows both sides of the industry is an author named Sarah Pinsker. She is, not only is she in her own band and plays music and writes songs, she's got some great books that have come out. Well, one novel and a bunch of short stories. And the novel, Song for a New Day, takes place in a near future where a pandemic has made us unable to go to live concerts. And wait a minute here, this is real life. Anyway, the book came out just before the pandemic, and she shows us what the music industry or people who play music might be like if all of that came to pass. So definitely recommend her as a music writer of a different kind.
Okay, well, that's great. Well, thank you so very much for your insight, because hearing the story was great, and then hearing what you brought to it was really exciting too. So we're going to ask you to come back at the end when we all come back and chat. But thank you very much for coming and reading with us. Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now I'm going to do the thing where I put on my glasses, because it's really helpful to be able to see. I'd like to introduce our next reader, Lou Rera. He writes horror, supernatural crime, and subjects that delve into the darker side of humanity. He's the author of Awake, Tales of Terror, a collection of 13 short stories coming this year, 2020, and Sign, a supernatural thriller of deception and murder. It was out in 2014. He's an active member of the Horror Writers Association, Just Buffalo Literary Center, and IMDb. His short stories have appeared in the anthologies Group Hex Volume 1 and Volume 2. His collection of flash fiction, There Are No Doors on a Cocoon, was published in 2008. Lou writes occasional reviews for Horror Novel Reviews. Thank you, Lou Rera.
Good evening, everyone. Good to see everyone, kind of. I can't see you from this house I'm in right now. But I want to preface what I'm about to read simply by saying that this is an abridged version. I had to cut it down so that it would fit within the time span that we're allowed to read. So I discovered all sorts of interesting things about the story having done that. The full story itself, unabridged, is in my book, Awake Tales of Terror. So, without further ado, the hat box. Around 4 a.m, Gil descended the attic stairs with a hat box under his arm, looking, searching, unable to shake that feeling that something was with him, attached to him like a parasite to a host. He downed 2 tranquilizers even though he'd been drinking bourbon since 10. He sat at his desk trembling, surrounded by boxes the day he moved in 4 weeks ago. He pulled out his laptop and began to type. I felt things in the attic. I heard voices. And then there was that smell, a terrible, putrid, sickly sweet smell, an odor I'd only experienced once before in college when I attended an autopsy of a man who'd been stabbed to death. He inherited the house, an old Victorian that belonged to his great-grandfather. The home had remained empty for over 75 years. Gil remembered listening to relatives who spoke of the place as if it were a precious heirloom, and yet no one chose to live there. But there was a nervousness in their voices, particularly when discussing the great-grandfather. Gil dismissed the lore of the heritage and wrote it off to vivid accounts from the home's history from his aunt's too many glasses of sherry. The furniture turned out to be just cheap, old, musty pieces from the 1920s. The lamps were Sears and Roebuck's, not Tiffany's. Gil moved through the house room by room, cleaning the place so he could either live there or sell it. The job was tedious and uneventful until he started work in the attic. He was convinced there had been an entity in the room with him. He could feel a physical presence occupying the space, and it left behind an essence he couldn't articulate. To say it made the room cold made it a cliche, but that's what he'd felt. This was the last room in the house, and the only remaining item to go through was an old steamer trunk. The shipping labels were dated from the 1920s. He used a crowbar to remove a rusted padlock. The trunk was empty, save for a single hat box at the bottom compartment. The box was round, approximately 18 inches wide, and at least as many inches deep. The edges of the hat box were frayed. It made him feel uncomfortable, and he couldn't articulate why. There was a circular lock above the front handle. Gil used his thumb to pull down the button to open the latch, but it was rusted shut or locked, perhaps both. He sat on the ledge of the attic entrance. When he moved the hat box, something inside rolled and shifted. He thought, there must be something other than a hat in there. Exhausted, Gil decided to wait till morning to break the hat box lock. He wanted to write his thoughts on what had occurred earlier and continued to type. I wouldn't classify my mood as depressed, but I'm disappointed with myself for letting my imagination get the better of me. I thought I'd find something in this old place. The attic was my last hope. As I walked down the hallway, I felt a coldness as deep as a walk-in freezer. I smelled an odd mix of flowers and something fetid. He thought about what he'd experienced. Gil tried to make sense of the night. He hit return and left 2 lines of space above and below his next sentence, and then he continued. That's when I saw her. I thought I'd left the front door open and a friendly, and I might add, quite lovely young woman was standing at the other end of the hallway near the kitchen entrance. The light from the kitchen lit her dramatically, and as if she was an actress moving into a spotlight on stage. She looked inviting, the way she stood there with one leg thrust out from the bottom of her dress. Small iridescent beads decorated her hemline. Whoever she was incredibly alluring. The scene played out in slow motion. It didn't occur to me why a woman I had never seen before would be standing there close to 4 a.m. Even though I had a lingering haze of alcohol rolling around my brain, it hit me. She's not real. Her image came into focus like putting on a pair of glasses and being able to see clearly for the first time. There was a distinct musty smell as she moved. She captivated my will, and at the same moment, I could see she had dark circles under her eyes. Her smile felt forced, like someone was poking a gun into her ribs. I took a step closer. Her face had a translucent quality that looked mottled, with very faint blue and greenish blotches just beneath the skin. I couldn't be sure, but the discoloration seemed to move slightly on their own, in different directions, like shadows under a lake of ice. I was in awe, but afraid. If I were to admit I was actually looking at a ghost, then what did it mean for everything else I've ever doubted? Was there really a God? Aliens? Maybe all the things I always scoffed at actually possess seeds of truth. I froze in place. Suddenly her movements blurred in fast, almost frenetic motions, like a film clip that had been sped up. I had seen American Horror Story, and in one episode, there were little children with their eyes burned out. But TV isn't real, although this apparition had the same type of creepiness. When I looked at the woman in front of me, I thought I saw a maggot wriggle from the corner of her eye. I felt both enticed and repulsed. I was transfixed by her strange, unsettling beauty, so much so that I hadn't realized she moved toward me. I wouldn't say she was walking, because she wasn't. She floated toward me. No, that wasn't it either. I can explain her movements in terms of what I know. I felt I was watching a Hitchcock film shot with lenses designed to bring an object closer. I wasn't moving, and neither was she, yet we were nearer. I wondered, was I in the throes of a mental collapse? I felt a stark and awful premonition of death about her. Not how she died or may have died, but that she possessed death in the power of her touch. Yet I no longer felt intimidated by fear. I had a strange longing for her, an ache only possible from periods of long separation. I felt I was about to lose a lover to the unknown. I understood what this meant. For the two of us to be together, I must die. She appeared to... The entry in Gil's laptop ended there. His desk, his laptop, the keyboard were covered with blood. Gil's girlfriend Laura had found his headless body, and the blood, pools of it, in swaths painted on the walls. Detectives found a bent knife with a broken blade from a wooden handle. They questioned Laura about Gil's description of the events that he had written about. As she spoke, the two men exchanged raised eyebrows glances when he asked her where she'd been at the approximate time of Gil's demise. In the end, they concluded that the perpetrator, possibly more than one, had entered the house through an unlocked door. The assailants had taken Gil's severed head with them, possibly as part of a cult or a demonic ritual. After they left, the lab technicians went through the house methodically. In the attic, in the trunk, they found an old hat box, rusted and locked. When a tech picked the lock, she noted that it was unusually heavy. Something inside lolled back and forth. Conditioned by years of experience not to be shocked, the CSI tech popped the lock open. Inside, they found a rotted, petrified human head. The hair was slicked back, and there were bald patches, like someone had torn out clumps of hair. One of the eyes had been gouged out, and a rough blade axe marks could clearly be seen on the exposed orbital bone. Gil's face appeared frozen in a sardonic grimace. His lips were pulled back, and his tongue had been cut from his mouth. DNA confirmed the head was Gil's. Tests were inconclusive, but how could they be possible? How could this be possible? The coroner could not determine if the injuries sustained were caused post-mortem. Further testing revealed that the head had been in the hat box for decades. The pathologist agreed that the head had been partially preserved by the presence of salt crystals and the hermetically sealed hatbox lid. Final analysis concluded that the lock had been rusted in place for decades. The coroner determined that Gill had been decapitated at some point within the last 72 hours. The saw marks on his neck matched the marks at the base of the petrified head. The entire head was completely desiccated except one section, the location where the head was severed. The area was still moist with blood. No scientific explanation was offered for what happened to him or how he might have been murdered. The broken knife, the only sign of a weapon, did not have a single drop of blood on it. The brain teaser was this: how were the perpetrators able to lock Gill's head in a hatbox, rust the lock shut, advance its decay for well over a half century? For years, season after season, the summers came and went. The Arctic air left swirls of powdery snow destined to melt into the first rivulets of spring. The wind mimicked cries, and if the conditions were right, they carried the vague sounds of human voices, whispering moans of exquisite pleasure and unfathomable pain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lou.
Sure.
That is a true macabre delight, that story.
Thanks.
That's the story that opens your collection, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
And it just captures, I think, at least from my perspective as a reader, it captures sort of that essence of horror that goes back to Poe or even Hitchcock, that the morbidity and the sort of mystery of it, the puzzlement of a macabre occurrence. Yeah. So I'm wondering, tell us a little bit about, if you can, what was the impetus for Awake? Why this particular collection of stories? How did you go about selecting them?
When I started putting these stories together, as a sort of side note, Awake actually applies to me because I am an incurable insomniac. So I do a lot of my work late at night. And so a lot of stories I write are sort of self-introspection, like you take yourself to places that you normally wouldn't, not because it's late, but because you put yourself in situations that you wonder how somebody might deal with. In this case, there is a normal sort of ghost experience for this woman and this man coming together of exploration of each other, only to turn out in a hideous murder of Gill. So, and then the hatbox, to tie that in the sense where the hatbox was mysterious to Gill when he first found it. It's mysterious to the police when they found it. And then, of course, the ultimate is when you have a supernatural element enter into a crime scene.
Such a great mix of different elements all together.
Yes, exactly.
Fantastic. And just for those of you who are watching, if you have any questions for Lou, please go ahead and put those in the chat. We'll be happy to throw them Lou's way. Actually, Lou, I'd like to ask you about something that's not directly related to writing, if that's okay.
Sure.
I happened to catch at Robert Atone's suggestion a documentary that you appeared in recently.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I was a professor at SUNY Buffalo State, and one of my colleague friends was working on a project that was, a 2 or 3 year production of this documentary about ghosts. And he approached the documentary in a way where he doesn't definitively put them down and say they don't exist, or he doesn't agree that they do exist. He sort of rides the middle line somewhere. And then the people that he interviews throughout this entire piece shed light on either one of those points of view. How I got involved was, we help each other in the projects that we work on. And, he knew that I had been a horror writer, and that I had some of my own experiences that is sort of brought forth in the movie, in the documentary, and he felt it was a good mix for storytelling because he's a screenwriter, script writer. I'm a fiction writer, but after all, it's about storytelling. So I appeared in that film more than I thought. I didn't realize how much of I was actually in it. And then, we towards the end of the film, we crossed a bridge that I posed some questions about my thoughts on what happened to my wife when she died. So it was a labor of love for filmmakers and writers, and we all help each other out when we're working on projects.
That's really cool. And it was a fascinating exploration of ghosts, both in the sense of skepticism and belief. And I thought it was a pretty balanced piece of work, which was interesting. What was the name of that, if you can remind me?
Let me see.
Robert is helping us out. Thank you, Robert. It's called "There's No Such Thing as Ghosts." And
yes,
it's on Amazon Prime.
But notice that there's the question mark. There's no such thing as ghosts, question mark. And now that this has been somewhat successful, Aaron Daniels, the writer and director, he is considering doing a series. The next one may be There's No Such Thing as Aliens or something like that. Maybe I shouldn't have released that information right now. I'm not sure, but I don't think he'll mind. But it was a good project to work on. It was very,
And then to come back to your collection, Carol has a question about the cover. Does that tie in with a particular story or the mysterious mood of the overall work?
Yes, this cover, I was mesmerized by two covers done for Stephen King by Hard Case Crime. He had done some novels for. One was called Joyland, and the other one was called The Colorado Kid, probably some of his lesser known works. And but the artist who did the cover for those, his name was Glenn Orbick, and Glenn had done some pulp covers like this one, and I was fascinated with his style. I thought it would be perfect for this book, and so I contacted Glenn, and I got a letter back from his partner, and she informed me that Glenn had died, and I didn't know that he had cancer, and it just happened very quickly. So, but she was kind enough to say, look, Glenn's estate is something that I manage, and I had laid out for her the type of project I was working on, and I said, is there anything you think that I might be able to use and license that would be appropriate for my book? And she was extremely helpful. She gave me a number of images to look at and pick from, and I picked one that I felt targeted a specific story in my book, which is the last story. It's called Satan's Salon. And if you read that story, this picture literally is the culmination of that story. So his estate was extremely gracious to license the image for me. And I felt, we all know as writers that first impressions are everything. And it was so important to get an image that was striking, that might cut through some of the clutter. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just that, 35,000 books come out every week. How do you get noticed, right? Other than the marketing aspect. So Glenn Orbick, I love his work in the first place, and his estate was nice enough to allow me to use that image.
Yeah, that's great. And it tied in so nicely with the story too. That's even better.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Lou, thanks so much. We will have you back on at the end for the final discussion and everything. Thank you very much for the reading.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Our next reader tonight, we are welcoming from the Great White North, the first of two readers from the land known as Canada. Chris Mars lives in Calgary, Alberta, with her daughter, Haywire the cat, and Mocha the ferret. Mocha is also a Facebook star, apparently. She's had numerous short stories published in various anthologies, including the Bram Stoker Award-winning The Library of the Dead. Novellas include Everything Leads Back to Alice, Bad Moon Books, Wild Woman, published by Journal Stone, Entangled Souls, a collaboration with Gene O'Neill. And you can find her at www.hauntedmars.com, as well as on Facebook or Twitter as @Chris_Mars or Instagram as Haunted Mars. So please welcome to our program tonight, Chris Mars.
Hello. Before I get started, I just wanted to say thanks to James and Carol for all the work that they put into hosting this Galactic Terrors series. It's really appreciated. And I watched some of the other ones as well, and yeah, they're good. A little bit of backstory to the story I'm going to read, The Frostlings. It's coming out in Prairie Gothic, a collection of Gothic short stories set in the Canadian prairies. And when I was first approached to write a story for this, I didn't know what I was going to write. I'm a, born and bred West Coast girl. So I figured the cold and the snow. So this is The Frostlings. I contemplated the cabin before me. Fluffy flakes of snow, dry compared to the sloppy, wet West Coast flakes I was used to, fell all around. They stuck to my hair and my eyelashes. Their blanket muffled sound. In the quiet, I felt like the only person left in a silent, white-covered world. We'd only ever come here in the summer. Now, it had its first winter visitor. "Look, Mommy, I made a snow angel," Maya said, glee in her voice. "You're not here," I whispered as my womb cramped, a phantom spasm. "You're still in Vancouver with your father." For a moment, my daughter in a pink snowsuit stood waving at me to come see. In the next, the snow swirled her away. Trembling, whether from cold, exhaustion, or a sorrow I didn't know, I gathered the grocery bags and meager supplies I'd picked up on my way through Stettler and my suitcase. The front door opened into a small kitchen, a counter in front of me, a stove and fridge huddled together on the left. Beside the door and under the window, dressed in faded curtains, crouched a wooden table with 3 mismatched chairs. A cribbage board and a deck of cards lay on the windowsill. Cozy. My Aunt Hazel and Uncle Peter used to sit here drinking beer and playing crib while the summer sunshine filled the room. Now frost limed the glass and a chill hung in the air. In keeping with our agreement to keep contact to a minimum, I flashed off a text to Greg to let him and Maya know I arrived safe. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk to me. I was here to recuperate, and my counselor thought bare minimum contact, while I did so, would be beneficial in the long run. I grudgingly went along with her. I banged the snow off my boots, removed them, then hung my coat on the hook behind the door. Picking up my suitcase to avoid tracking in the snow clinging to the wheels, I went through the archway into the living room. Unadorned wood panel walls darkened the room. Even the light coming from the picture window refused to brighten it. A fireplace sat along the far wall. I'd been warned it was the main source of heat, but that I would find a space heater in the cellar. Without my jacket, the cold nipped at me for attention. My immediate plan became to unpack a sweater and get some heat going. Outside, the wind kicked up. It moaned through the eaves and threw snow onto the window pane. The clothing I brought filled 3 of the 5 dresser drawers and floor closet hangers. I set my toiletries on top of the dresser and shoved the suitcase under the double bed. Hiking up the sleeves of my fuzzy hoodie, I went back to the living room to tackle the heat situation. One smoke-filled room later, I discovered how to work the flue and, voila, a small crackling fire chewed at the logs. I tossed in a few crumpled balls of old newspaper in hopes of bringing it to a roar, then closed the metal curtain. Night had fallen during my tussle with the fire, and along with it came a growling stomach. I put away the groceries, enough for 2 days, and set about making tomato soup and grilled cheese. While the soup warmed and the sandwich fried, I checked my phone for a message from Greg. I didn't expect a reply. My heart leapt when I spotted his name among the social media notifications, then sank when I read it. Thanks for letting me know. We miss you already. I saw Kevin yesterday. My breath caught and my heart stuttered. I powered down the cell instead of scrolling through notifications to find the rest of his message. The anxiety, always waiting to pounce, threatened to tighten my chest when I thought of reading what he had to say about my brother. The first bubbles roiled to the surface of the soup. The first bubbles roiling at the surface of the soup became a welcome distraction. Once it was boiling, I poured it into a bowl, added pepper and butter, put the grilled cheese on a napkin, and brought the meal into the living room. Sitting at the little kitchen table without my brother, aunt, and uncle felt too lonely. During the summers we spent here, every meal, except for the rare picnic or trip into Stettler for dinner, happened at that table. Uncle Peter would regale us with tales of his youth, while Aunt Hazel pretended to be scandalized. However, when his tale ended, she always followed up with a tale more scandalous than his. Kevin and I laughed at her stories until we clutched our bellies and fought not to fall from our chairs. Now Uncle Peter resided in an urn, which in turn sat on the dresser in Aunt Hazel's assisted living home. The paltry fire had grown while I made dinner and now tossed enough heat to warm the room. A wingback chair with a footstool before it invited me to sit. I popped up my slipper-clad feet and placed my sandwich on the little table beside the chair. While I dipped one sandwich half into soup, the fire roasted the soles of my slippers. The toasted cheese and soup tasted like childhood. Outside, the wind shrieked by the window and howled around the corners. Cold winter sunlight streamed through the seams of the drapes when I awoke the next morning. A giggle faded into the distance and took the sliver of a nightmare with it. A reoccurring nightmare I'd hoped I'd left behind in Vancouver. I'd come here to heal from something that felt so real but wasn't, not to drag it here with me. Thinking of the nightmare reminded me of the text from my husband the night before. I picked up the phone from the nightstand, then set it back down. It'd keep until after coffee. I tossed off the covers and instantly regretted it. Cold air rushed in and puckered my skin into goosebumps. Teeth threatening to chatter, I added a sweater over my pajamas and an extra pair of socks under the slippers. I made a mental note to find the space heater, if only to keep the bedroom warm at night. Once I lit the fire, first attempt, yay me! I opened the drapes and squinted from the glare of sunshine hitting the brilliant white snow. Last night's storm left a fresh blanket of the stuff, about a foot judging by the pile on the roof of my car. The road remained invisible, and I wondered if it would be plowed today or if I'd have to wait until tomorrow to head into Stettler. Freezing air wafted from the window. Along its edges, frost feathers curled and twisted into random patterns. I reclosed the drapes and to keep the heat from escaping. I got the coffee going and its warm scent filled the kitchen. Before the brew completed, I poured a mug and brought it back to the windback chair. I savored the first sip of heaven and cognizance. It provided the chemically induced jolt I needed. I powered my cell back up to a chorus of pings and dings of incoming text and social media notifications. I ignored them all and focused on finding Greg. He said he hopes you find peace you are looking for, the peace you are looking for, and to remember it's not your fault. Maya and I agree. Love you. I swear if I hear my family, especially my brother, say I'm not to blame one more time, I'll scream. Okay, I won't. But if not for Maya, I might seriously consider not returning to Vancouver. Pushing the family drama and incident out of my mind, I sent off, "Tell them will do. Love for you all." I disregarded the other messages and notifications and powered the cell down again. On the drive through the mountains, I decided to take a break from social media and, well, everything. Too many, you're in our thoughts, sending prayers, hugs to you in this difficult time. Let me know if you need anything, text and comments. At first, I liked and loved every response. Now they felt like a chore, an emotionally fatiguing, draining chore. At some point, the comments and texts started to sound false, more like platitudes than meaningful well wishes. I stoked the fire and went to refill my coffee and start my breakfast. And I'll stop here.
I want to put my popcorn. Hear the rest of the story, Chris. Wow. That was great. That was great.
Thank you.
I was really intrigued by that because it's just this woman alone in this story talking to us, sort of in her head, but yet it's so rich. It's like, I hate to say it's almost a truism, but you made the setting of the cabin where she's isolated, all those glorious little details. That was like another character in the story. That was really cool.
Thank you.
Cool.
That was sort of, I was hoping that might come across because, like I said, I was born and raised in the West Coast and I love Gothic fiction. And one of the things I love about Gothic fiction is the atmosphere and the descriptions of the settings and how some of the stories, the setting actually sounds like it's another character. So I was attempting to do that.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that the table crouched in the room, really, that thing just jumped in my head. I'm going to remember that phrase for a while. That's very clear. So
Thank you.
Yeah. So tell me, you've done a bunch of short stories and some novellas. What are your thoughts about different lengths of work for horror? Do you like short stories the best? What's your favorite?
To be honest with you, I like all lengths, and it depends on what I'm in the mood for. So if I'm on my break at work, my lunch break, I want to read a short story.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm, say, leaning up against the kitchen counter, watching the dinner, making sure it doesn't burn, I'm more of a novella because, there's good places that you can stop and take a break. Mm-hmm. And then weekends when I'm just lounging around and drinking my coffee, that's when I read novels. So I can't really say which length for reading I prefer. Mm-hmm. For writing, because as a single mom raising 2 children and I didn't have a lot of time, but I wanted to write, short stories for me were the best way to go when they were really young, because I could still write and I could still, hone my craft without putting in the commitment that a novel takes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then as I got older, I progressed to novellas. And now that my daughter, my youngest, is an adult, I started writing my first novel.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, which is really slow going because I've been doing that for about 18 months, but I still work full time and fit it in when I can. Mm-hmm. So it's usually about 200 to 300 words a night, which isn't a lot, but at least I'm doing something.
That adds up. No, that's tremendous. It's like those of us who do NaNoWriMo, do it a little bit every day. It really makes a difference. So, kudos to you. That's terrific.
Yeah, I wish I could do 1,000 to 2,000 words a day. But I need 2 extra hours I need 26 hours instead of 24.
There's a thing called sleep, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Well, I'm also intrigued by what you said about Gothic kind of stuff. But do you think there's still a place for Gothic tales in the modern day?
Personally, I think there is, yes. Because Gothic is more than just your traditional Victorian Gothic. There's modern Gothic, urban Gothic. And I just learned that there's actually a Japanese version of Gothic. So I'm going to be checking that out. Oh, I did not know that.
Okay. Well, I've read a couple thousand books that have a woman in a nightgown on a cliff with a castle on the back, and there's one light in the tower. So that's
I know.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I call those Victorian Gothic.
Yes, yeah. Very much so. Yeah, and you can't do it without the nightgown. It's just not quite the same. Yeah,
right.
That's terrific. Thank you for joining us. And now I have to find out more about why she's off there all alone by herself and blah blah blah. That really hooked me in. So thank you for sharing part of your story with us, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye. I'd like to introduce Our next reader, Craig DiLouie, is an American-Canadian author of speculative fiction with notable works including The Children of Red Peak, Suffer the Children, One of Us, and Our War. And he is a member of the Horror Writers Association. Craig DiLouie.
Hey, you horror people. Hi, it's Craig DiLouie. Thanks for being here. Thank you to the hosts and the New York HWA for holding this event. I'm going to be reading to you tonight from my upcoming novel, The Children of Red Peak. It's coming out from Hachette on November 17th, and it's a work of psychological and a little bit of cosmic horror. Just to give you a quick intro to it, it's about a group of people. They grew up in and survived the horrific last days of an apocalyptic cult. Years later, when one of them commits suicide, the others reunite to confront their past and the entity that appeared on the final night. It was inspired by a reading of Genesis, where God instructs Abraham to take his son Isaac to the top of a mountain, bind him, and sacrifice him as a burnt offering. And Abraham does exactly this, but at the last moment, with the knife poised, God tells him to stop. And after reading that, I thought, I wonder what that story would sound like from Isaac's point of view. And so, I wrote this novel about. Thematically, it covers a lot of things: memory, faith, belonging, family. The snippets I'm going to read you three short snippets. There are three main characters, so I'm going to do one for each, spread out throughout the book. And so the first one begins now, and this is David. After years of outrunning the past, David Young now drove straight toward it. His Toyota hummed south along the I-5 as the sun melted into the coastal horizon. The lemon trees flanking the road faded into dusk. Most nights, he enjoyed the solitude of driving. He'd roll down the window and disappear in the sound of his tires lapping the asphalt, soothing as a Tibetan chant. Not this time. California was burning again. The news blamed the wildfire on a lightning strike in the sequoias. Dried out by the changing climate, the forest went up like a match. Outside the car, the air was toxic. A crimson glow silhouetted the Sierra Nevadas like a mirror sunset. Red Peak called to him from all that fire and ash. David turned on the radio to drown out his memories. He'd spent years forgetting. In all that time, he hadn't kept in touch with the others. He hadn't even told his wife about the horrors he'd survived. Claire believed he was visiting a client and not on his way to the funeral of an old friend to whom he owed a debt. He didn't want to go, but Emily was dead, and he had her letter. I couldn't fight it anymore, she'd written in flowing cursive. All those years ago, 5 children survived. Now there were 4. Next character is Deacon. She drove away, taking his breath with her as the heartbreak returned full force. Sad, realizing the best years of your life happened before you turned 15, that everything after felt fake, one scene after another in a long dream. So good, too, like a long, excruciating tattoo on the soft flesh covering the jugular, where a single flinch could ruin the permanent mark. Buzzing with ideas, Deacon raced to Honey and got in. The seat behind the wheel, its fabric ripped with bulging yellow foam, welcomed him with a sense of home, which made sense for a man who had none. A long drive awaited him. First, he had to write these feelings down. He caught another Latin proverb tattooed on his arm. Abyssus, abyssum invocat. Deep calls to deep. In the Bible, deep meant the word, the living spirit. Under that, no pain, no gain. Amen, motherfucker, Deacon said. He reached under his seat, his hand brushing against empties and ancient McDonald's wrappers, and gripped his songbook, a black, faceless thing he poured his howling soul into when the muse struck. Next, he thrust his hand in the glove compartment for a pen, which turned out to be dry. He flung it away and got another, a flowing black marker whose scrawl would bleed through the page. Deacon wanted to write a song. No, make that an album. Actually, a concept album, a rock opera in which he would reveal to the world the beauty and horror of the family of the living spirit. The Gospel of Deacon. Better yet, the Gospel of the Sad Cat, an homage to Cats Are Sad, the name of his band. In this open, he'd finally share the thing that for 15 years had lived under his skin, share his pain in a way that weaseled into his listeners' flesh, like an auditory tattoo or a new type of STD. By the time they finished listening to his story, they'd never forget it, and some might even join a cult themselves. Part of him believed. David could deny all he wanted, while Beth wanted to have it both ways by attributing the phenomena to a glitch of mental perception. Barking up opposite trees, and both of them were wrong. Deacon believed something had happened up on that mountain, something that defied rational explanation. The Gospel of the Sad Cat would be his way of starting a dialogue. He was due in LA in a couple of hours. The band was getting together for a rehearsal to tighten up their set before tomorrow night's club gig. They'd have to wait, which would piss them off. Oh well, this was art, which trumped everything. That included eating and sleeping, not to mention rehearsals. Pen poised over blank paper, he gazed across the ashfall and breathed the poisonous atmosphere. In the distance, the crimson glow outlined the mountains under a pall of white smoke. Since the wildfire had started, it had grown to become a breathing god, its cloud spinning clockwise like a hurricane when seen from space. Slowly, reality collapsed around his own fresh burns. The heartbreak of seeing his childhood best friend Stepford wifing himself, the exquisite pain of loss when he saw Beth again, the horror of facing Emily in her casket, and that church organ, its droning and haunting sound being the worst of all. Organs always reminded him of his mother. We played so beautifully, he wrote, his ode to Beth. The pen paused over the page before scribbling again. We played so beautifully, but the wall fell down. We played so beautifully, but the wall came round. He'd write a song for each of his friends, render a few classic spirituals like Nothing But the Blood and Moody Goth, and build toward a dirty, howling climax, followed by a triumph, a vast choir of sopranos, discordantly heralding the resurrection of the dead, leaving behind only bloodstains to bury. Time blurred. His phone rang. He ignored it. The second time, he answered it. I'm working. So are we, Laurie said. Unfortunately, we seem to be missing our singer. Screw your singer. I'm working. Silence on the line. So Laurie knew what he was like when the muse burned him alive, and that he always produced his best lyrics in this state. On the other hand, she was in the band had a gig, and the gig was tomorrow, and this weighed equally in her mind as she was a practical person who lived in the real world. All right, she said. All right, he echoed. Just hurry your ass up. Hurrying my ass up. Right, he terminated the call. Shit. His fugue was over. Deacon inspected the pages he'd filled with black ink, violent as flame. His hands were smudged with it. He had no idea what he'd written or how strong it was. When he fell into the zone, his hand caught a fever and did its own thing, like automatic writing. Good enough. Okay. The new album screamed for birth, but he had a gig first, and in the end, the gigs trumped all. Standing in front of a crowd and ripping himself to shreds, inviting them to share in his pain and survive it together. He read the last line of his hurried scrawl. The meaning of life should transcend the meaning of death. Amen. Deacon closed his book and roared out of the parking lot, bound for the city of angels. And for the last snippet, we have Beth, the last character. For 15 years, Beth had lived with a time bomb. In 2005, Dr. Klein had shown her the bomb and where it was buried. In 2012, James Chambliss had tried to help her defuse it. Since then, she'd simply lived around it, which had required constant and extreme self-control. And over time, she'd come to believe that she could have it both ways, a diminished past and a full present, but she was wrong. There had to be an easier way to live than at the edge of one of two extremes. For most of her life, her mother had held a kitchen knife poised over her throat. Ridding herself of the past was the key to her future. Despite all the work she'd done on her brain, she had more ghosts in her head than a haunted house. She needed to put them to rest forever, or else she might end up choosing a far easier path the way Emily had. I couldn't fight it anymore. As Beth got ready for her jog, she decided she'd reach out again, this time with a specific plan. Deacon, David, Angela. Together, they'd go to Red Peak on the 15th anniversary. If the trip triggered anything, so be it. If she had a freak out, even better. Either way, she'd come home a new woman, strong and complete and wanting nothing. Dressed and ready to run, she went downstairs to the lobby where the doorman intercepted her to hand her a box that had arrived only minutes before. The package was from Emily, as battered and heavy as the past. Like her mother, her friend had reached out from the grave to present a mirage of some elusive final truth. Holding the parcel, Beth sensed the answers it offered would only lead to more questions. A chain that would only be solved by returning to Red Peak. She opened it. Thank you very much. I appreciate you listening.
Thank you, Craig. That was fantastic.
Thank you. Cheers. And thanks again for having me and all of us. This was wonderful.
Oh, good, good. I'm glad you're enjoying it. You're most welcome. I think going by the comments, people have really enjoyed hearing the snippets from the book. And, I think I love that you picked a snippet for each of the main characters. This is such a character-driven book. Mm-hmm. The story is so personal in a way, and yet it's about a group. It's not a single person's story. It's, and it's each character's individual tale is really compelling, I found in the book. So I'm wondering how you found it managing that cast. Did you find it difficult to balance which character should be on, on screen, so to speak, at a given time, or did one character or another kind of try to steal the scene?
Characters take on a life of their own, and they're going to try and take over, but they are given their screen time. They were given equal screen time, and I let them shine in the space they were allotted, but they had a lot of life of their own in that space. Well, as a writer, it's always a risk when you write multiple points of view, because you're always going to have a reader who says, love this character, I didn't like that character. And so it's a challenge, and it is a risk, but you have to do with not only what your characters want to do, but what your novel demands as the art. This story needed to be told from multiple points of view, because I wanted to show a spectrum of trauma, and I wanted to show that it's a story of the survivors, not just a survivor. And I thought that was more important.
Yeah, I get it. And now this is, the idea of cults, I guess, in a sense, is something you've been interested in for a while, isn't it? I think you wrote some poetry along those themes.
Yes, this novel was actually sort of an outgrowth of that effort. That poetry work was a work of poems that were produced by the survivors of an event like this, where they went through poetry therapy. They refused to talk for years, and then they went through poetry therapy. And I thought, over time, I just kept coming back to the idea and thinking, there's so much more there, and it really demands a novel to complete it.
So this was a good opportunity to kind of really explore what you wanted to look at with that theme.
Right. And it's not really, it's about a cult, but it's not so much about cults. It's not the titillating cult, like people are going to read this and they're going to get helter skelter, with people with crazy eyes, and they do. It's more about the transformation. It's more about how belief is a two-sided coin, where you have good and evil. And a lot of the world's good and evil has come from belief, which really stems from our capacity for delusion. And I don't mean delusion as a bad word. I mean but just that we would believe in things maybe that aren't there. That it's a survival trait, and it can be very useful to us. But if it's pushed too far and too hard, especially once you're on a slippery slope of belief, where you're here and you get this new information, and suddenly you're down here. It's very easy to go from bad to good or good to bad within your own system of belief, because of how it works, because it has its own logic. So I was really fascinated in the transformation of a group that starts off as something that's kind of, some of their beliefs may seem alien to some of us, but it's a happy place. But they get this entity, God, offers them a deal, and they end up on the slippery slope to hell on that road of their good intentions. And that I was fascinated by that psychology. Way more than the titillating, look at the cult, they're so scary, they did something evil. I wanted to show that psychology of why would someone join a group like this? Why can't they get out? And why years later, even if they're out, they may leave the cult, but the cult never really leaves them.
And I guess looking into sort of the psychology of sort of the darker portions of human experience seems to be kind of a recurring theme in your work. I'm thinking of Suffer the Children, where you go to some very dark places, and there's a monstrous aspect to that novel, but it really ultimately is about how the characters are coping with this dark reality. And One of Us is another one where the psychological element is very strong. So would you say that's something that you pursue actively with each book, or is it just sort of, has that happened?
Well, there are two pieces here. One is that horror isn't horrifying unless you have character first, right? And characters are made up of individual psychologies that tie to the species psychology. And so that all of that is fascinating to me as someone trying to create living and breathing people, not only from my own experience, but from that maybe reflect the human experience. And then the other piece of this is whenever I write horror, I try and take a trope and then turn it on its head and then examine its consequences. And so when you're examining the consequences of a trope, you're definitely getting into the psychology of human fear and trauma and that struggle to understand, and how sometimes a good thing about human instinct can also be bad if it goes to this other place. And so I'd like to mash all that up in my fiction, and that's where I ended up with Suffer the Children, where you have the vampire children, but the monsters in the book are the parents who will do anything to keep their children alive out of the purest love in the world, or One of Us, which is about the fundamental human instinct of prejudice and how that can run amok in a misunderstood monster novel. And then now in this novel, which really explores themes like family, faith, belonging, and that thin line between belief and delusion.
That's great. Yeah. So I think, that's one of the things I enjoy most about your fiction, is that you're always tackling that kind of character exploration in a new way. Even Our War is also very psychological in its execution and its how the story unfolds.
Well, I think when you write a novel that's intended to be a standalone, you have this opportunity to really explore theme. And I remember my first HWA event, Leslie Klinger was on a panel, and he said, when you sell a book, sell its nonfiction concept, right? Don't tell people what the book's about. Tell them what it's really about. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating, and which is how I ended up positioning Suffer the Children from it's a vampire and to how far would you go for your kids? That's what the story's about.
Right.
And I really like that, and it got me thinking much more about theme and diving into theme, and that that theme is sort of like this backbone, the spirit, the soul of the novel. And so I'm very attracted to those ideas, especially because it gives you this opportunity with horror to do one of the things I love about horror, where you see in novels like Naomi Alderman's The Power, which isn't exactly horror, but has horror elements, and some Keon Patrick Burke's work and some other authors, which is to hold up a fractured mirror to the human soul and say, this is you. You have these ideas about yourself, but wait a minute, we're going to put you in this situation. What would you do? How would you feel? And have them put through the ringer with the characters and see where they'd end up at the end. And if people close the covers and if they're affected by that and they feel something afterwards, and it's all the more powerful. And to me, that's the mark of the kind of book I want to read. Mm-hmm. And so that's the kind of book I at least try to write.
That's terrific. Well, thank you for giving us so much insight into your writing and for sharing the excerpts. I'm going to bring everybody else back on in just a minute. First, I want to just apologize to anyone who is joining us late. A couple of people have contacted me during the reading and pointed out that at some point our Facebook page said this started at 9 p.m. rather than 8 p.m. Rest assured, if you're joining us now, we are recording this. It will be posted on the Galactic Terrors YouTube channel. And so you can still catch the first portion of the session for tonight. And I do apologize for any mix-up. I know at least one person who's joined us tonight had said they saw this listed somewhere starting at 1 a.m. So I'm not exactly sure what happened with our timing on this. Such are the ways of Facebook, or as I heard it recently called Farcebook. So who knows? You never quite know how it's going to work out. But I do thank all of you who are with us tonight and who have joined us. And within a couple of days, this should be available on our YouTube channel. All right, so I am going to bring on the rest of our readers. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We'd like to catch up with everybody. There we go. And we're going to ask everyone kind of here.
Popcorn's gone.
Oh, Carol finished the popcorn. Okay, who has more popcorn? While we wait for any questions to come in the chat, why don't we just go around and each of you tell us what's next for you? What's the next publication, next event, next big project? Randee, we'll start with you.
Let's see. Well, I've kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier. Dim Shores, Volume 2. It's an anthology of weird and horrific fiction, and that's where my story, Rough Beast Slouching, is going to appear. So that's kind of the next thing for me. I do have another story which I read at KGB, I think when we were still allowed to go out, called Cat Person, that's supposed to be coming out in Horror for the Throne. But of course, Horror for the Throne has to come out, and that's also been held up by the pandemic. So honestly, that's kind of it. I will actually be doing panels at PhilCon, which is coming up later this month. I just remembered that. I've got a workshop on how to do a reading online. So Exhibit A. And a couple of panels, and I'll be doing a reading with the Broad Universe folks. So hope to see some of you guys there.
Terrific. If the Cat Person story is the one I'm thinking of, that is one of the darkest, most twisted stories I've ever heard. So
that is high praise. I thank you, James.
Definitely keep an eye out for that one. Lou, what's next on your agenda?
A few things. I'm trying to get in the December 1st deadline for the Horror Writers Association's anthology on otherness. So I'm working on it. I have it, fleshed out, and trying to get that finished and meet the requirements that they've laid out within the document. And that's, if accepted, that's for a 2022 publication with Houghton Mifflin, I think. And I'm also working on a novella that started out as a short story titled The Murder of Crows. And that sprung out of the group that I'm in with all the Long Island writers. Some of their critiques sort of led me in the direction of where this should go. And I'm gonna push it through that way. So those are the two main things I'm working on.
And just if anyone wants to know how dedicated Lou is to his craft, the Long Island group that he's talking about, Lou has actually, when we were still meeting in person, flown from Buffalo to Long Island to attend our meetings.
And drove.
Yeah. It's gotten a lot easier since everything has moved online, I assume.
Yes.
Chris and Craig, how about you?
Me? Oh, okay. Well, as I said earlier, I'm working on my first novel. And then Gina O'Neill and I have done quite a few collaborations together, and our novella Entangled Soul is going to be included in a collection of short stories called Entangled Soul and Other Stories, put out by Omnium Gatherum in 2021. So it will have our collaborative novella, but then it'll have short stories from each of us as well. So that's my big writing news.
Cool. That sounds great.
Yeah.
For me, the first thing I wanted to do is now that I'm actually looking at the comments, I can't do that while I'm talking or I'll freak out. So, but I'm seeing the comments now, so I'm seeing all the great people here. So hi, Patrick. Hi, Lee. Hi, Brian Matthews. Some others. Anyway, I recognize a bunch of people on there. So it's great to see you all. Thanks for coming. My next thing is, I'm kind of all consumed with the launch of The Children of Red Peak. There's a lot of interviews and whatnot going on this month. That's November 17th. And then other than that, next year, I'm taking actually a little bit of a break unless some huge idea compels me. The power of the novel compels me. I'm going to be working on some of these pulpy dime novel series that I write, that I self-publish. They've done phenomenally well. I've read, these little World War II series, and they're just simple man in a hole short novels in a series with a likable protagonist. They're tons of fun to write. I learn a lot while I'm doing it about history, and there's a great fan base for it. They absolutely eat it up. So I'm just going to do probably a lot of that next year, and then see where it goes.
That's quite a change from Children of Redbeak. That's great. And,
Jim, how about you? What do you have coming up, Jim?
Well, I will also be at PhilCon on online, which is I think the website's philcon.org, right?
I think so.
Okay, so if you're interested in checking out PhilCon the weekend of the 21st, 22nd,
Yeah.
thereabouts, they're moving it online this year. And other than that, just working away. I have a short story collection coming out next year from Raw Dog Screaming Press that will include a selection of my science fiction and fantasy stories. So it'll be a follow-up to On the Night Border, but not as horrific. So.
Not as horrific. Yeah.
And Carol, I know you just had a story published.
I did indeed. I have a story called Face It in the Devil's Due anthology, which just came out on Halloween. It's a sort of a set of Faustian tales from Valhalla Press. Nothing is ever as it seems. So that's kind of cool. And just for fun, I always love doing this the wrong way, but that's a picture of the cover. I don't have the book yet because things are so delayed getting paper books out and such like that. So I'm excited that, good. I'll go this way. Now you can see me next to it. Yeah, which of us looks better? Don't answer that. No, that's cool. I'm happy to have that come out, and that's a lot of fun. And I will also be doing a bunch of fun stuff at PhilCon. I have a reading on Friday night, which is cool. And a bunch of our other members that are in the audience are doing stuff at PhilCon as well. And I'm doing some other panels. And one of them is really intriguing. It's talking about do different types of fiction need different kinds of editing? Like fantasy versus science fiction versus horror. So I think that's going to be an interesting conversation. So,
yeah, that's a great question. Maybe that's a good question for us to close on. What do our writers think about that? Do you think you need a different kind of editor or different type of editing if you're writing a different type of story? Craig, you probably have a lot of experience with that since you're writing in so many different genres.
No, I don't. Well, when you're writing commercial fiction, I think the line edit becomes a lot more important because it has to be as tight as possible, and you really have to conform to a certain standard of short sentences, short paragraphs, short chapters to keep the pages turning. You need readability is king, whereas with other types of fiction, with other types of horror, maybe it's a little bit more literary. You can stretch it out, and maybe the kind of editing that would be more beneficial to you would be more like a story editing, where you want everything to make sense. You want it to have integrity. You want the theme to come through just enough. And so you're looking for more of that, I think. And that's how I would approach it. But it really depends on the writer, I think, more than the type of work.
Yeah.
Randee, how about you? I know you've had experience on both sides of the editing desk.
I think you really just need an editor who understands the genre and understands the mechanics of what's needed, as well as, has an interest in it. I would prefer to have an editor who really knows horror, tackling my horror stuff, and somebody who's really more into dark fantasy or even fantasy, just doing the other stuff. So that's really that's all the real insight I could probably put into that. But
okay.
Yeah, I would say I agree with Craig. I mean, a line editor is a line editor, and they would get the mechanics of everything correct. But if you're working with someone who wrote a book on Egyptology, I think that the substantive editor would need to know something about the genre you're working in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to share a comment from the Peanut Gallery from some guy named Jeff Strand.
Hey, Jeff.
Well, one of his YA comedies was edited as if it was action adventure, and it was maddening. Thank you, Jeff. And you have the appropriate expression in your photo there.
That's a classic Jeff expression. Yeah.
All right. So now that we've stolen the PhilCon panel ahead of time,
Oh, not a problem, you know.
just take a minute to plug our next reading, which will be December 2nd. We have Danielle Ackley McPhail, Carol Geisander, Rick Poldark, and Jeff Strand set to read with us on Thursday, December 2nd at 8 p.m. And we'll make sure we get the time squared away correctly next time. We do this going forward every second Thursday of the month.
And that's actually December 10th. It's the second Thursday, so that would be December 10th. Yeah. Hey,
guess what? We're not very good with calendars and
1, 2, 4. I don't know.
Yeah. That's why there's two of us, is because Carol has to correct my mistake. So let me try that again. December 10th. Oh God! All right, they're probably really tearing us apart in the comments now.
That's all right. We do words, not numbers. What the heck?
Visit our website, hwany.org, for general information about the New York chapter. And if you'd like to get updates on Galactic Terrors specifically, we have a newsletter. You can sign up at the URL in the banner, which unfortunately is not linkable, but I can put that in the chat, or maybe Carol can put that in the chat.
Sure.
All right. You can also click subscribe below the YouTube window and just follow the channel, and that'll give you the updates, and you can see when we're doing our next session. And I think in December, we're going to have a pretty amazing lineup to announce for 2021. Carol doesn't know it yet, but I've gotten some really good people interested in reading with us.
I can't wait.
It'll happen very, very fast. So I'll update you as soon as I figure out how to make my email work again.
Oh yeah, I feel for you. You lost your email on probably the busiest week you've had in a long time, you know. So
that's one way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Special thanks to our readers tonight. You guys did a fantastic job, and we appreciate you sharing your work with us. Good luck with everything. Definitely look for everybody's upcoming books or books that are out.
Yeah, they're having the cool ones. You know,
thanks.
Oh, the other thing I just want to say, all the books make really good holiday presents. You know,
who doesn't like a book?
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will talk to you soon. All right. Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Well, thanks, everybody.
Good night.